Welcome to today's lesson. We're touching on the War of 1812, otherwise known as America's Second War for Independence against Great Britain. So let's get on with it. So what are some of the events that led to us having to fight a second war against Great Britain? Well, one reason why, this should sound familiar, Great Britain was fighting a war against France prior to fighting this war against us. So just like how Great Britain fought against France in the French and Indian War prior to the American Revolution, Great Britain was again fighting against France. This time it was against Napoleon Bonaparte and his empire and trying to take over territory in Europe. So the United States, they kind of wanted to stay out of that war. They wanted to stay neutral between the two sides. They didn't want to take a side between France and Great Britain. Another major event that led to the war was that U.S. shipping was being harassed. Basically, they were trying to trade and cargo was being taken from them. Continuing on with some of those events. So the U.S. was trying to expand their economy. And to do so, they were trying to trade with France and with other countries in Europe. But the ships kept being stopped. Basically, it boiled down to Great Britain not wanting France to receive supplies or other things from us, so they stopped our trading ships. And they went even further because the British Navy was so low that they would do something called impressing American sailors. Basically what was happening is they'd stop those trading ships and they would go on the American ships and raid the sailors on board, and they would force them to work in the British Navy. So since Americans didn't find that very fair, that was something that led to growing outrage from the young United States against Britain. Some more things that were going on. There was this Native American guy named Tecumseh, and he had a vision for some of his Native American tribe and some others to unite and form an independent Indian nation in territory that's today the United States. Great Britain supported Tecumseh and supported this idea, and of course the United States viewed that as kind of a land grab, a grabbing of their territory. So Tecumseh wanted to unite the tribes in the area into one nation, kind of like how our founding fathers turned a bunch of independent colonies into a nation, into the United States. And the United States claimed that the land that was given to them by the Treaty of Paris at the end of the American Revolution, they claimed that that land was theirs and that Great Britain had no right to interfere. Okay, so who wanted to declare war? Well, there was this group of Southern congressmen who were called war hawks, and they definitely favored war even though it hurt the East. Their rallying cry, they kept saying free trade, and they were fighting for seamen's rights. So again, those sailors, those seamen who were being impressed by the British Army, by the British Navy to serve them. So that was their rallying cry. And here are two of the more famous war hawks. On the left we've got Henry Clay. On the right we've got a guy named John Calhoun. So they were two of the most outspoken war hawks. So what were some of the benefits of going to war with Great Britain? One is that one goal was to reopen trade. Another was for national pride. They thought that they are insulting us by doing these things. So for their national pride, they wanted to declare war and defend their honor. They wanted to stop sailors being impressed into the British Navy. And Canada, believe it or not, we thought we could expand our territory, and we thought that Canada would welcome us with open arms, that they would want to also do away with Great Britain and become part of the young United States. So we wanted to add to our territory as well. What were some of the downsides of going to war then? Well, not everybody in the U.S. wanted to go to war. Just like in the Revolution, not everybody was a patriot. Some were loyalists that wanted, or neutralists that just wanted to stay out of it. The same goes here, that not everybody wanted to go to war. Our military was still very small. Our standing army was small. It was actually militias, those volunteer soldiers, volunteer armies, that comprised most of our forces, and they didn't want to fight outside of their state border. So if they were a militia from Massachusetts, they didn't want to go and have to fight over in Vermont or other areas. And again, our navy was quite small. We only had 22 ships. And Great Britain was still a superpower. Even though we defeated them in the Revolution, that was due to a lot of support that we had from other countries like France and Spain that we were able to defeat Great Britain the first time. They were still this huge superpower, this huge army and navy, and we were still a small developing country. And we were terrified that we could lose some of the territory we had just gained, like the territory up to the Mississippi we'd gained with the Treaty of Paris at the end of the Revolution, or the land that Jefferson had just bought less than a decade ago. That's called the Louisiana Territory. But we did end up declaring war. In June of 1812, President Madison asked Congress to declare war because, again, Congress is the one with the power to declare war, even though the President is the commander-in-chief of the Army. The vote was actually really split, where there was a lot of the southern states that did want and did support the war, but a lot of the northern states wanted to stay out of it. Those were kind of the ones that wanted to stay neutral, to stay out of the debate, the fight. Actually, the war started with an invasion of Canada. So as I mentioned previously, the United States thought that we could add to our territory to the north by invading up in Canada. So here are some key battles, some key outcomes from the war. One was that as the United States invaded Canada, we burned down the city of York, which is commonly known today as Toronto. So again, the U.S., we figured that the Canadians would want to do away with Great Britain and become part of the United States, and that simply did not happen. Another famous battle, and actually many battles, happened on the Great Lakes. So if I go back to the previous slide, there was many battles. You can see all of these different icons for battles that would have happened on the Great Lakes. And one of the key ones happened by Oliver Perry here on Lake Erie. And because he won that battle, the United States controlled the Great Lakes and controlled Lake Erie throughout the war. But one thing that really hurt us in the war was that Great Britain set up a blockade of their navy from the eastern seaboard. So it definitely put a ding in the amount of trading that we could do, and that was a big part of the economy for the northeastern states. The roof is on fire. So in August of 1814, British forces sailed into Chesapeake Bay and they captured Washington, D.C. They burned down the White House and the Capitol building. In fact, the President, Madison, and his wife Dolly barely escaped before the British invaded and burned Washington, D.C. Oh, say can you see? So unlike the battle that took place or the invasion of Washington, D.C., there was another attack that happened in Baltimore, but the Americans were ready for the British here. The city's militia inflicted heavy casualties on the British, and after a bombarding, so constant bombs on a fort named Fort McHenry on September 13th, 1814, the British ended up abandoning their attack on it. And there was a guy named Francis Scott Key who witnessed the entire bombing of the fort, and he wrote a poem which was talking about the bombs bursting in air, and all through the night you could see the bombs, and then at the dawn's early light our flag was still there. And of course you recognize those lyrics because they became the lyrics to our national anthem. Eventually the war did end with the Treaty of Ghent, and that treaty was again negotiated in Europe. It was signed on Christmas Eve of 1814, which ended the War of 1812. The war ended in a stalemate. Basically, nobody won the war, nobody gained any territory, nobody lost any territory. And in fact, one of the major issues going into the war, the impressment or capturing of our sailors, our traders, it wasn't even addressed in the treaty. Fortunately, it faded away on its own as another war, the war that Great Britain was fighting against France, that also ended, which kind of ended the need that they had for impressing sailors. However, even though the treaty was signed, there was actually another major battle that happened down in New Orleans. And this was an interesting one because there was actually even pirates and different pioneers or frontiersmen that fought alongside the U.S. troops against the British. The Americans won, and it made this guy named Andrew Jackson into a national hero and a household name. So again, this is before the days of actors and actresses and movie stars. And so a lot of our national heroes that people idolized and looked up to were these war heroes, and Andrew Jackson was one of those war heroes after this battle. This also ensured that the Treaty of Ghent was ratified. So again, it had been signed, but it had not been approved yet. So let me ask you this. If the War of 1812 actually ended up in a tie, why is it important? Why do we study it? What was the outcome? So basically, it gave the United States a national identity. So this was a young, developing country, and twice Great Britain invaded and declared war on us, and twice we were able to hold our own. And they were considered the strongest army and navy in the world. So yeah, it gave us a boost of confidence, you could say. It started us thinking about continuing westward expansion. So it put that little idea in our head of manifest destiny, that it was our right, our duty to expand and continue expanding westward. And this actually ended bad feelings towards the British. So we had kind of been carrying a grudge back from the Revolution and how King George had treated us. This was kind of the end of those negative feelings, and it continued to the point where Great Britain today is one of our closest allies. And it created a hero in Andrew Jackson, the guy that's today on the $20 bill, eventually became our 7th president. It made him a hero. All right, thanks for joining me today. I hope you learned a little bit more about the War of 1812.